Okay, I'm live. I'm reading A Lot to Remember. This is largely an account of journeys through the Lot, which is a part of France. It was dedicated to Denys and Charles, who were both her husbands. Joan Marshall Grant passed away in 1989. This book was published in 1962. Today is the 5th of November. And I am halfway through Landscape for Banners, which was chapter 16, and it's not very much to end this chapter, so I will do this now. I then went to the Renaissance shaped on the ramparts of the outer courtyard, but here again I felt nothing but pleasure in its architecture. And this pleasure somewhat diminished because it was cluttered with scaffolding, being in process of restoration by the Beaux-Arts, and now contains only copies of its most famous treasures. A descent from the cross and a mise en tombeau, for the originals are in the Metropolitan Museum of New York. The chapel is built directly above another one, whose entrance is outside the chateau gate. This is dark and dank, and one of the villagers told me that his grandfather refused to attend Mass there because he objected to his prayers having to ascend through a sieve of the nobility before they could become audible to God. The second time I went there was with my daughter Gillian and her husband David Wynne, when they came to join us that August. I had told them about the tranquillity of Biron and how restful it was to wander through it alone. So it was unfortunate that our arrival coincided with 3 coachloads of hot and disgruntled tourists, with whom we were herded round the castle, which I spent a comparatively peaceful hour contemplating a magnificent begonia which hung on the wall of the gatehouse with carillons of copper bells. To the south and southeast of Villeneuve-sur-Lot, the landscape has the magical quality sometimes found in the background of medieval tapestries, for there are walled hilltop towns, particularly La Roque, Primérol and Tournon-d'Agenais, from which it would seem perfectly contemporary to see a lady from the courts of love ride out with her troubadours, or to hear a fanfare silver. In June, the fields on the steep slopes look as though they were spread with banners, for wild flowers growing among the young crops show as patches of solid color when seen from this unfamiliar angle, and each species sharply divided from the one growing in the neighboring plot, so that a rectangle of poppy scarlet may adjoin one of vivid violet sage, or a panel of pink centauri be set between wide borders of cornflower blue and toadflax yellow. Charles and I were driving past Montagu de Quercy, 30 kilometers southeast of Villeneuve-sur-Lot, when I noticed that the village streets were strewn with rushes. The procession will start in a few minutes, we were told excitedly when we went into the cafe for a drink, so we decided to stay to see what it was all about. Half an hour passed, during which the shutters of all the houses were closed, and the facades draped with white sheets and tablecloths, to which bunches of flowers, some real, some paper, had been pinned. We decided to explore and found groups of women decorating altars, which had been erected in 3 side streets and in the open space before the church at the crest of the village. It was not until later that we realized that these sites represented the 4 cardinal points. The procession will start any minute now, said an old man who came out of his house to join us, perhaps feeling we might be getting restive after waiting an hour at the vantage point in front of the church to which we had been directed. With some difficulty he sat down beside us and then pulled up the leg of his trousers to show us his wooden leg. The leg still hurt him, although it had been cut off by a shell splinter in 1914, a disaster which he related with exceedingly vivid detail. Suddenly the church doors swung open and a double file of little girls in white emerged into the brilliant sunshine and advanced towards the altar, singing in a high, clear treble that sounded like the twittering of birds. Behind them came a palanquin supported on 4 stout poles, each with 2 bearers, stalwart villagers dressed in Sunday black. It was curtained with yellow brocade, and the canopy had a tuft of yellow ostrich feathers at each corner, which made it look like a 4-poster bed. We thought it contained a votive statue until we noticed that beneath it a pair of trousered legs was keeping in step with the bearers, who set it reverently down by the temporary altar. The curtains were then drawn back to reveal a robed and mirrored bishop, who dismounted with dignity, although his ecclesiastical vehicle stood so high off the ground that this required the same agility as stepping over a lawn tennis net. The congregation, most of whom were women and all dressed in black, had followed the procession from the church and formed a semicircle, facing the bishop, who was now seated in a secular armchair from which he addressed the assembled company. The theme of his discourse remains obscure for me, because we could hear only an undulant murmur. He then rose to his feet and delivered a Latin prayer, while the people knelt and were afterwards lavishly sprinkled with holy water. The bishop then took off his spectacles, polished them with his handkerchief, and again entered the confines of the palanquin, which this time led the procession, while the little girls, whose attention had strayed, were chivied back into line by 3 agitated nuns. We were about to follow the crowd when Charles noticed 2 old women who were trying to carry the bishop's armchair down a flight of precipitous stone steps. It was obviously too heavy for them, and they thankfully accepted his assistance, panting out that they had only taken this difficult shortcut because the chair must reach the next altar before the bishop did so. By exerting every ounce of his considerable strength, Charles managed to achieve this feat single-handed, although on one particular steep and slippery slope of cobbles he lost his footing, and it seemed only too probable that he would complete the journey using the chair as a sledge. However, all went well, and the chair was safely in position before the palanquin came round the corner. Charles' gesture was appreciated, for after the procession had disbanded, we received much kindly hospitality before we were allowed to depart. That was the end of chapter 16, and the chapter 17 is entitled The Beautiful Village. All have a good remember the 5th of November.